They say New York City never sleeps. But there is one place where the city's noise stops short, where the Hudson's chop and the scream of LaGuardia jets fade into a hush that feels older than Manhattan itself. A scrap of land barely half a mile long, with brick ruins swallowed by vines and windows blinded by leaves. A place the city locked away and quietly forgot. This is North Brother Island, the island you're not allowed to visit. Stand on the shore of the Bronx and look east across the narrow channel. If the light is right, you'll see a bell tower jutting out of treetops, brick walls with their faces peeled off, stairwells that end in sky. It looks abandoned because it is, but it isn't empty. It's full of stories: quarantine, disaster, scandal, and one woman who became a symbol of everything New Yorkers feared about invisible disease. Before there were towers and bridges and neighborhoods with names, the city fought epidemics with distance. Cholera, smallpox, diphtheria, names that cleared streets and filled tenement hallways with the sound of coughing. In a crowded city, isolation was the only tool that worked. So officials drew a line on the water and said, "That is where the sick will go." They built Riverside Hospital on North Brother Island in the 1880s. A campus of brick pavilions, screened porches, a ferry dock, service tunnels, a boiler house, the bones of a self-contained world. The location was perfect on paper, close enough to reach by boat, far enough to keep contagion away from the mainland. Nurses and orderlies lived on site. Patients arrived in the only way you can arrive on an island. You were carried there. There are photographs from those early years. Sunlit balconies where beds were rolled out to catch fresh air, white uniforms against dark brick, and the river always beyond the railing. It could almost look peaceful if you didn't know why people were here. Then came June 15, 1904, a Sunday church outing aboard the General Slocum, a paddle-wheel steamer packed with families in their best clothes. The boat caught fire in the East River. Wind, varnish, and panic did the rest. Lifeboats stuck. Life preservers, old, dry, and deadly, crumbled to powder. The river filled with smoke and burning wood and screams. North Brother Island was the nearest shore. Doctors and nurses ran to the waterline. Orderlies yanked survivors from the current. The dead came too, more than 1,000 of them, a number so large it warped the city's sense of what tragedy meant. By sundown, Riverside's lawns were crowded with the living and the not living, a field hospital without enough bandages, a morgue without enough sheets. That day branded the island forever, and it never washed clean. In 1907, the hospital received a patient who would make it infamous, Mary Mallon. History remembers her by a nickname she never wanted, Typhoid Mary. She was a cook, Irish-born, stubborn, private, and fiercely sure of herself. Investigators linked a trail of typhoid outbreaks to kitchens where she had worked. Mary didn't accept the theory. She felt fine. She carried no guilt. The science of asymptomatic carriers was new. The idea that someone could look healthy and spread disease sounded like a curse, not a diagnosis. The city had laws, and Mary had no lawyer with power to bend them. She was forced into quarantine on North Brother Island. Years went by. She was released once, on the condition that she never work as a cook again. She took another name, took another kitchen, and the outbreaks restarted. The ferry brought her back to Riverside. This time she would not leave. Imagine what the island was to her. A skyline forever at arm's length, holidays heard but not seen. The smell of bread from bakeries she'd never visit again. They say she worked in the island's lab, that she kept to herself, that she lived there until 1938, when the city listed her death on a certificate, and the island lost its most famous resident. To some, she was a villain. To others, she was a victim of bad timing and worse headlines. Either way, North Brother Island turned her into a story the city told itself about fear, control, and the things you can't see. The island changed as medicine changed. New vaccines, better plumbing, fewer epidemics needing ferries in the night. During World War II, Riverside took on a different mission, treating soldiers. Later, in the 1950s, the city tried something bold, using the island as a rehabilitation center for teenage drug addiction. It was a concept ahead of its time and a system in over its head. Staffing lagged. Rules hardened. The line between treatment and confinement blurred. If you were a parent desperate enough to sign the papers, the island might save your kid. It also might bury them in a regime they weren't ready for. Eventually, the program collapsed under its contradictions. By the 1960s, the city shuttered the island. Staff moved off. Doors were locked. Windows were left to the weather. A place built for quarantine returned to a different kind of isolation. That might have been the end of North Brother Island's human story. But nature saw an opening. Herons, egrets, cormorants, you can read the roster off the power lines of the East River, found a sanctuary on the ruins. The brick warmed in spring. The trees were tall enough. The ferry no longer came. The birds moved in, nested, multiplied, and made the island their own colony. New York City did something you might not expect. It let them. The Parks Department closed the island to protect the rookeries. No public access, the signs say, and they mean it. From time to time, a rumor surfaces that the city will open the island to tours. The answer every time is no. The buildings are unsafe. The ground is riddled with holes and covered with poison ivy. The birds nest on schedules that don't care about your content calendar. And somewhere in those shadows are the edges of stories too complicated to turn into a tidy brochure. The island is off-limits because sometimes, rarely in New York, but here, off-limits is the right call. Of course, that only made the island more tempting. Urban explorers talk about it in code, as if speaking the name out loud would summon a patrol boat. A few have slipped ashore at night in kayaks, filmed the catwalks and morgue trays, and left before the gulls had the morning to themselves. The footage looks like deleted scenes from a Patient Zero movie. Tiles slick with moss, autoclaves gone to rust, an X-ray machine losing its last argument with gravity. The most haunting shots aren't the rooms. They're the trees, roots cutting through stairwells like quiet knives. If you stand on the water at the right angle, you can see the nurse's residence jutting above the canopy, its balconies eaten by vines. Imagine the sound here when it was alive. The clang of the kitchen, the squeal of a cart's wheel, the cough from a room at the end of the hall, the ferry's horn slipping across the water at dawn. Now imagine it with the sound turned off. Only wind through broken panes, the scratch of branches against brick, and in spring, the absolute racket of nesting birds staking out their inch of the city. North Brother's twin, South Brother Island, sits a short row away, smaller, lower, also off-limits. Between them runs a strip of river commuters forget about while they read headlines. The airport throws planes overhead like clockwork. Queens blinks in the middle distance. The skyline does what skylines do, proves you're near the center of the world. And there in the middle of all that noise is a capsule where time refused to modernize. If you're tempted to argue with the closure, consider this. Ruined tourism has a body count. One rotten stair and you're through a floor. One rusted nail and your story ends with a fever you didn't plan for. One spooked heron and a whole rookery fails. The island isn't a prop. It's a patient that made it through the 19th century and a biology experiment that's thriving despite our curiosity. What more do you need it to be? And yet, don't we all want to know what's behind a door with "Do Not Enter" on it? That's what North Brother Island really is. A polite, stubborn no in a city famous for go. It asks you to be satisfied with the shoreline, to learn from a distance, to leave some rooms unentered. So what can you see legally? You can pass by on a boat tour. There are a few that skirt the boundary and point out the bell tower. You can watch from Randall's Island or the Bronx shoreline when the leaves thin in winter. You can read the history that isn't rumor. Health department reports, the statistics that once turned bodies into numbers and now haunt the footnotes. You can look up the names of doctors and nurses who stayed on the island when the city was busy being loud. And you can remember that quarantine is just a word for kindness with a badge. And you can think about Mary Mallon again, not as a cartoon villain, but as a person who fell between the rungs of early 20th century public health. If she lived today, there would be different laws, different protections, different headlines. But the same fear lives under the city's skin. The fear that your neighbor looks fine and carries a story you don't want to share. North Brother Island is made from that fear and the hope that we can manage it without losing our humanity. There's a line I keep turning over. A nurse wrote that the island was lonely in a busy way. That seems right. Work never stopped. Boats came, boats went, charts were filled, beds were turned. And yet every day ended with the same horizon at arm's length. For some, that must have been a mercy. For others, it felt like exile. Cities are good at forgetting the people who stand between a threat and a crowd. North Brother Island forgot nothing. It remembers everything. That's why it's still off limits. Think of the city as a body. The island is a lymph node, quiet, essential, unnoticed until something is wrong. It swelled when disease came. It shrank when vaccines won. It scarred when scandal visited. And then, when the danger passed, it tucked itself back into the river and let feathers be its future. On summer nights, you can see lightning bugs scribble in the understory where nurses once walked. In winter, snow turns the broken steps into a clean line, as if inviting the living to climb a staircase that leads only to air. Between those seasons, the city's story ebbs and floods, and the island measures time in nests hatched and bricks fallen. One day the bell tower itself will fall. One day the last lintel will slide. But some portion of the island will remain. A rise in the water where New York stored its fear and did its work and tried to be better than last time. From the mainland, the island can look like a dare. It isn't. It's a lesson about boundaries. Not every mystery wants to be solved by stepping over a rope. If you want an ending, take this one. A ferry leaves the city in the fog, loaded with people the city is afraid of. It lands at a small dock. Hands reach out and help the unsteady up the ramp. Doors open. A ward fills. Nurses do what nurses always do. Days pass. The skyline stays close and unreachable. And then months later, the same ferry carries some of those people back. Across the same water, past the same bell tower, into a city that forgot who paid the bill for it to feel safe again. North Brother Island won't welcome you. That's exactly what makes it the most New York place in New York. It exists not for you, but for what the city needed when life was on the line. It is a monument to the idea that sometimes the right thing to do with a beautiful view is to leave it alone. So no, you can't visit, but you can listen. The island will tell you everything if you let it. Quietly, from the other side of the channel. Subscribe to DarkCurio for more forbidden places and hidden history. And tell me in the comments, if the city opened the island for one day only, would you go?